My name is Jack, and the day everything snapped for me started with a microphone and a sentence that cut deeper than any knife. Kelsey, my stepson, adjusted the mic at his high school graduation, cleared his throat, and said, "We want to thank the man who gave us life, our real dad, not the guy who just paid the bills." The whole gym went quiet, like somebody had pulled the plug on the world. I was sitting in the back row in a buttoned-up shirt, sweating through the fabric, smiling like an idiot up until that exact moment. His twin sister, Madison, nodded and smiled right at their biological father, Chris, who was standing 3 rows in front of me like some hero dragged straight out of a commercial. Chris was the kind of man who could not be bothered to send a birthday card, a man who once pawned Madison's bike for gas money, a man whose main contribution to those kids' lives was a string of unpaid child support and some very average genetics. My wife, Lisa, did not even turn around to look at me. Her face stayed frozen in a strained smile that looked more like a mask than anything human. I did not stand, I did not storm out, and I did not say a word. I just sat there, every muscle turning to stone while people shifted in their chairs and tried to figure out who the guy who just paid the bills actually was. A woman in a blue hat nudged her husband and whispered, "Isn't that their stepdad back there?" He squinted at me like I was some stranger who wandered in for free cake. When you raise 2 kids from diapers to diplomas, it stops being just time and money. It turns into your whole identity. And when somebody takes a flamethrower to that in front of a crowd, you do not explode, you turn cold. I looked at Kelsey, grinning like he had just won an award, looked at Madison, looking polished and perfect, then stared past Lisa at a loose wire above the basketball hoop so I would not have to look at her. If I had, I might have broken right there in that plastic chair. After the ceremony, everybody crowded around the front steps to take photos, like nothing brutal had just been said into a microphone. Lisa stood between the twins with her arms wrapped around them, smiling wide for the camera as if she had not watched me get gutted publicly. Chris slid into the photos easily, laughing and tossing Kelsey's cap back at him, saying, "Wear it, Dad," like this was some wholesome sitcom moment. Nobody asked me to step into a single picture. I stood off to the side, invisible at my own family's big day, like a ghost who was not done haunting but had already been forgotten. When the crowd finally thinned, I walked up to Lisa while she was laughing with her sister, a plastic cup of wine already in her hand. I asked, "Do you want help taking down the banners and the congratulations signs?" She took a slow sip and said, "Do not take it personally, Jack. They are just kids." Those 3 words, "just kids," landed like a match on gasoline. I did not yell back. I just nodded and walked away. Later in the garage, the old beer fridge hummed and the rafters creaked like the house itself was embarrassed for me. I sat in a stained folding chair, elbows on my knees, staring at cardboard boxes labeled in black marker. Kelsey, Science Fair. Madison, 3rd grade drawings. Christmas decor, 2016. Inside were little shrines to all the times I had shown up when nobody else bothered. The Pinewood Derby car Kelsey and I carved late one February night with a half-broken rotary tool and a how-to video. Madison's volcano covered in pink paint that I helped her rebuild after it collapsed the night before the fair. An old lunchbox with faded cartoon ninjas that Kelsey used to call his battle pack, which I had cleaned peanut butter out of more times than I could count. Funny what sticks and what does not. Sitting in that garage with 15 years of ignored effort around me, the pain was not sharp anymore. It was a dull, familiar ache. After a while, I stood up, my knees cracking louder than I wanted, and walked upstairs like I was leaving a bunker after a war. Lisa was in the kitchen, scraping dried frosting off a plastic plate with the edge of a fork. Without looking at me, she said, "You are being dramatic, Jack. It was just a moment. Do not take it personally." 15 years of my life had just been reduced to just a moment. I did not answer her. I walked down the hall into our bedroom, opened the closet, pushed aside the jackets I never wore, and reached up to the small safe on the top shelf. I punched in the 6-digit code, heard the soft click, and pulled out a thick envelope full of neatly stacked checks. Every year, every tax return, every bonus, every late overtime shift I did without complaining, I had turned all of that into a college fund for those kids. On top was a fresh check with Madison's name on it for her first semester. I held that piece of paper for a long time, thinking about the little girl who used to climb into my lap, sticky granola bar in hand, asking, "Daddy, can you read to me?" And I folded the check back into the envelope and slid everything into the safe again. And I did not slam the door. I just closed it gently and listened to the lock click. People like to talk about heartbreak like it is some big explosion. Mine felt more like a glacier, slow, heavy, impossible to stop. Standing there under the dim closet light, one clear thought came to me, so sharp it almost made me laugh. They thought the money was just there, waiting for them. They did not realize I was the money, and I was done waiting. The house smelled like rotisserie chicken and cheap sangria that night, while everyone celebrated in my kitchen. Laughter spilled out into the living room, too loud and too forced, with Chris's bark of a laugh rising above everyone else like he was the star of the show. He stood at the kitchen island, acting like a returning hero. Shirt too tight, gold chain flashing, beer in hand. Lisa stood next to him, touching his arm every time she laughed, using that high-pitched giggle she used to save for my birthdays. The twins were out on the back deck with their friends, phones out, posing for photos in front of the banner I had hung that morning. "Congratulations, Madison and Kelsey, class of 2025. I stood in the corner of the living room, near the bookshelf where our wedding photos used to be. Those had been replaced by candles and a sign that said, "This is us," which felt like a punchline to a joke I did not find funny. Nobody spoke to me directly for most of the night. Lisa floated past with plates and pitchers, bumping into Chris on purpose, while Kelsey walked right past me to grab another soda like I was a piece of furniture. On the folding table where people dropped gifts, I saw the simple white envelopes I had put together for each kid. Kelsey opened his out on the deck while I watched from inside. He read the card, glanced at the check, shrugged, muttered a flat "thanks," and tossed it onto a pile next to a half-eaten cupcake, like it was nothing. Madison never even opened hers while I was there. That was the moment everything flipped for me. It was not anger that came over me, it was freedom. There's a strange kind of peace in realizing nobody expects anything from you anymore, not your respect, your time, or your presence. They had already written me out of the story. So I decided to rewrite the ending myself. I slipped into the bedroom, opened the closet, and went back to that safe. This time I took every check, every savings bond, every extra deposit I had ever set aside for them, and put it all into my briefcase. Then I logged into a different bank, opened a completely new account under a name that had nothing to do with our household, and moved every cent there. I set up strong passwords and security codes. When I finished, I closed the laptop, put on a calm face, and went back out to the party like nothing had changed. The next morning, I called my supervisor at the plant and said I needed a personal day. He just said, "Take what you need, man," which somehow hit harder than all the fake congratulations from the day before. I ironed a clean shirt, put on some decent khaki pants, and drove across town, not to work, but to a brick office building with mirrored windows and a receptionist who greeted everybody with the same sincere smile. I was not there to browse. I had a plan. The first person I met with was a lawyer named Mr. Greer, a sharp-looking guy in his 60s who looked like he played chess with judges and actually won. I slid the envelope across his desk and told him what I wanted. He raised an eyebrow and asked, "You were serious about this?" I said, "I became serious the moment they stood on a stage and thanked a man who never bought them a notebook." He nodded and got to work. We set up a trust fund, but not for Madison or Kelsey. I set it up for Sarah, Lisa's niece, who was her brother's daughter. Sarah was quiet and serious, the kind of girl Lisa never liked because she did not care about brunches, gossip, or trying to impress anybody. Sarah worked nights at the grocery store and spent weekends cleaning offices to help her sick mother. She had once dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, but with her father gone and money tight, college had turned into nothing more than a wish. I had not seen Sarah in a couple of years, not really, but I remembered one Christmas Eve when she brought cookies and quietly washed dishes while Kelsey played video games and ignored her. She was the only person who asked if I needed help carrying things to the car that night. So, after I left the lawyer's office, I called her. She answered, a little breathless, telling me she was on a break at work. I asked, "Do you still want to go to college?" She laughed like I was joking. I told her I was serious and said I could not promise everything, but I could get her started. Tuition, books, housing, and a bit of a cushion. She whispered, "Why me?" I said, "Because you never asked." And that was the truth. Later that day, I met with my financial advisor and moved all the funds officially into the trust under a name that had nothing to do with the Matthews family or our old joint accounts. No one in that house would be able to find it without paperwork and a miracle. Back home, life went on like nothing had changed. I saw a group message pop up on the family tablet, Madison sending dorm room photos, Kelsey talking about his gaming setup, and Lisa chatting about which wine glasses she would donate once they moved out and she got her space back. They talked about move-in dates, what color sheets to buy, and what to do with Kelsey's lizard. Lisa joked about turning Madison's room into a yoga studio. Not one of them checked the actual account or asked me a single serious question about the money. They had grown used to thinking that things would simply work out and that I would always quietly cover whatever needed to be covered. While they were planning their perfect little college launch, I was quietly changing the whole script. It was not out of pure spite. It was about principle. You do not spit in the face of the person holding the umbrella and then expect him to carry you across the next storm. A few days later, the first tremor hit. Lisa was in the kitchen when her laptop chimed. She opened an email from Hudson State University that said they had not received the deposit for housing and tuition, and the payments on file had bounced or never arrived. Confusion washed over her face. She grabbed her phone and called me while I was sitting in my truck on my lunch break, unwrapping a turkey sandwich. "You did not send the deposit for Hudson," she said right away. I took a bite, chewed, swallowed, and said, "I will look into it." She snapped, "Look into it? This is serious." I said, "Probably just some glitch," and she went quiet for a second, then asked if I was all right. I told her I was fine and hung up. That night, Madison asked Lisa if the money was really there. Lisa brushed her off, saying it was a mix-up and that I overthought everything. Kelsey, lying on the couch, said, "He's not going to do anything. He's too soft. Remember when he cried during that cartoon movie?" Madison giggled, but there was a shake in it this time. A couple of days later, Lisa texted me, asking if we could have brunch together on Sunday. Just us, because we needed to talk. She added a little heart at the end, like that would soften the blow. I agreed, because sometimes it is worth letting a person build the trap they think you cannot see. The brunch place she picked was one of those trendy spots that serve eggs on wooden boards and charge extra if you want ketchup. She called it neutral ground, but what she really meant was a public place where she could keep her voice low and act reasonable. She showed up in a white linen outfit, sunglasses on her head, smiling like nothing bad had ever happened. "Hi, stranger," she said, kissing my cheek, pretending the last week of silence and tension had not existed. I ordered black coffee. She ordered something complicated with poached eggs and sauce and a mimosa. Then she started in. She said the email from Hudson had rattled her, and she thought maybe we had miscommunicated about the timeline. She reminded me of times I had handled our taxes, stayed overnight at the hospital with Kelsey during his asthma scare, and driven all over town trying to replace Madison's lost binder before a big exam. It was a greatest hits reel of my own sacrifices, played back to me like bait. She said the graduation speech had stung and tried to brush it off as teenage nonsense, saying the kids think in hashtags and do not always realize what their words mean. I asked, "Do you understand what their words meant?" She tilted her head like she was listening carefully, then said she just wanted us to be all right and that the kids would come around. Finally, she smiled and said, "So, we are good? You will handle the deposit?" I said, "Of course." She squeezed my hand and told me she knew she could count on me. Later that day, instead of sending a penny to Hudson, I met Sarah behind the community center where she worked, still in her janitor shirt, cheeks flushed from scrubbing floors. I handed her a thick envelope full of documents, confirmation numbers, and account details, all in her name. She opened it, eyes wide, and said she could not accept it. I told her she did not have to say anything, she just had to do something good with it. On top of the stack was a note from me that said, "Because someone should know what effort looks like." She looked up, and for the first time in a long time, I saw real gratitude. While Sarah and her mother were quietly absorbing what this meant for her life, Kelsey posted a picture on social media with Chris, both of them holding beer cans in front of a grill, captioned, "Can't wait to move into Hudson. Big thanks to the man who made it happen. Free ride. Family first." There was no mention of me, not even a fake one. That was fine. When orientation week rolled around, Madison had bought new sage green bedding and fairy lights for her dorm walls and had her photos planned out in her mind. Kelsey had packed like he was going on tour, with a game console, 2 monitors, and expensive shoes he was saving for his first party. That morning, they both posed for photos in front of the house. Lisa took the shots, Chris commented online that he was proud, and nobody even asked if I wanted to come along for the drive. I stayed at home on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching birds fight over the feeder I kept forgetting to refill. I had taken the day off work, not for them, but for myself. Around 2:30, Lisa's messages started. First it was a call I ignored, then a text, "What is going on? Call me now." A little later, Madison messaged me directly for the first time in months, saying tuition had not been paid and she was standing in a hallway at orientation completely humiliated. I replied with 3 words, "Talk to your mother." By after 4 o'clock, tires screeched in front of my house and fists hammered on my front door. Lisa burst in, shaking, yelling that the tuition never cleared, that Madison was crying, and that Kelsey could not get his dorm key. I said, "Rough day," and walked to the kitchen. She demanded to know what I had done. I said, "I thought I was just the guy who pays the bills." That sentence hit her like a physical blow. I took a folded withdrawal slip from a drawer and slid it across the counter, dated the day after graduation, showing the entire college fund emptied. She stared at the paper, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You cannot be serious." I told her they had made themselves clear about who mattered and who did not. She tried to say this was different, that this was the kids' future. I told her I had simply made decisions with my own money, legally and quietly, like I always had. Outside, a car door slammed, and Kelsey and Madison rushed in, faces red, voices raised. Kelsey shouted that he did not even have a student identification card yet. I said, "Sounds like a problem for your real dad." Madison asked why I would do this after everything. I said, "You stood up there and told everyone I am just the guy who pays the bills. So, I stopped paying." They looked stunned, like someone had turned off gravity. Lisa sat down, buried her face in her hands, and asked what they were supposed to do now. I walked to the door, held it open, and said, "Figure it out." For the first time since I had known them, they actually had to. A week or so later, a message popped up in the extended family group chat. Matthew's family barbecue at Aunt Linda's this Sunday. Bring a side dish. Normally, I would have skipped it, but given how things had gone, I decided to show up early and keep to the edge of the yard. Aunt Linda waved and handed me a glass of iced tea, saying she had not seen me since Easter. The backyard slowly filled up with folding chairs, kids running through sprinklers, and adults balancing paper plates loaded with burgers and potato salad. Chris showed up in a backwards cap, already on his second beer, trying too hard to laugh with Madison and Kelsey like they were old friends instead of kids he had abandoned for years. Lisa came late in a bright yellow dress, trying to look carefree while everything around her was falling apart. She made the rounds with hugs and loud laughter, but the cracks were obvious. It all started to unravel when Uncle Dave casually asked Kelsey how college life was going. Kelsey froze and glanced at Lisa. Lisa let out a strained laugh and called it some administrative hiccups. Then a cousin asked Madison what she had decided to study. That was when Lisa snapped. She pointed at me across the yard and told everyone that I had emptied the college fund the day after graduation. The whole yard went silent. Aunt Linda looked confused and asked about the graduation clip Lisa had shared, the one where the twins thanked Chris as their real dad, while Lisa smiled and clapped in the background. Someone else muttered that it had looked pretty intentional. Lisa's face turned red as she tried to claim it was all the kids' idea and that I had blindsided them. I finally spoke up in a calm voice and said, "I did what I was told. I stopped paying the bills." Kelsey tried to say it had just been a joke, something said in the moment. I told him he had said exactly what he meant. The family did not rush to Lisa's defense the way she expected. People avoided her eyes, stared at their plates, and shifted uncomfortably. I set my glass down, thanked Aunt Linda for the invite, and left quietly. Lisa stood there in the middle of the yard, clutching her drink, as the truth, not blood, decided where loyalty went. Not long after that barbecue, a simple post started spreading online. It was a slightly grainy picture of Sarah standing in her new dorm room holding a box of books, looking like she still could not believe she was there. The caption, written by her mother, said that her daughter had gotten a second chance, not because of luck or obligation, but because someone had chosen to help. She thanked me by name, saying I had owed Sarah nothing but had given her everything. It was not a huge viral moment, but it caught fire in our small town. Teachers, neighbors, old church friends left comments saying Sarah deserved it, and that this was what real fatherhood looked like. A few even mentioned how they remembered me sitting at every recital or school event back when the twins were younger. Lisa saw the post, and it hit her like a wrecking ball. The story she had tried to control started slipping away from her. The next morning, she drove to my job unannounced. I was on my break near the loading dock drinking gas station coffee when her car pulled in crooked and fast. She stepped out with red eyes, makeup half finished, like she had gotten halfway through pretending everything was fine and then given up. "Jack," she called, already crying. "Please." I kept walking. She hurried after me, begging to talk for just a minute. She said, "They are your kids too. We made a mistake. We did not mean it." The word "we" hung in the air. I did not answer. I swiped my badge through the door, stepped inside, and let it close gently between us. Through the glass, I saw her sink down onto the pavement, shaking, her mascara streaking down her face. That night, when I got back to the small apartment I had moved into, the hallway light was flickering like always. There was Lisa, on her knees in front of my door, her purse spilled open, a bottle of generic anti-anxiety pills rolling slowly across the tile. She was not just crying now, she was sobbing from somewhere deep. "Jack, please," she said, "look at me. I will fix it. I will make them apologize. Just do not walk away from us." A couple of neighbors peeked out from their doors, then retreated. This was not a private scene anymore. It was a show, and I was done being part of anybody's performance. I stepped past her carefully, unlocked my door, and paused just long enough to look her in the eyes with something that was not anger anymore. It was indifference.
the kind that comes when you finally accept that not everyone who cries in front of you deserves to be saved. Then I closed the door quietly behind me.
A little while after that, I met Sarah at the bank to finish what we had started. The branch was quiet, carpet soft underfoot, with soft music playing and a calm that felt almost out of place given everything that had happened. Sarah sat beside me, her hands clasped tight, hair straightened, wearing a blazer that still had a tag tucked inside the sleeve. She had clearly bought it secondhand, probably with tip money. The teller smiled and said everything was ready, they just needed a final signature to release the remaining funds into the trust. I slid the folder towards Sarah and told her there was no trick. She signed with hands that trembled. The teller called her a lucky girl. I shook my head and said she was not lucky. She had simply never forgotten who actually showed up for her. When we walked out into the late afternoon sun, Sarah hugged me hard without saying much. Then she climbed into a ride share and went off toward campus and a future she had thought she would never reach. I drove slowly out of town afterward because there was one last place I needed to pass. The old house looked almost the same from the outside. Same brick, same cracked driveway. But this time there was a for sale sign planted in the front yard, wobbling in the breeze. The garage door stood open with boxes stacked inside. Madison dragged a suitcase down the walkway. Kelsey carried a television under his arm. They kept their eyes on the ground, not looking up. Lisa sat on a plastic chair on the front porch, legs crossed, sunglasses hiding her expression even though the sun was already dropping behind the trees. She saw my truck, and I knew she knew I saw them. There was no dramatic scene, no yelling. It was just the end of a chapter. I did not slow down or roll down my window. I did not wave. I drove past that house, the one where I had packed lunches, fixed broken pipes, helped with homework, and tried to patch the holes another man had left behind. I drove past the people who had stood on a stage and called someone else real. I drove past the idea that unconditional love always comes back to you. It does not. But sometimes, if you are lucky, it ends up going somewhere it actually belongs. Looking back on all of this, the part that hits me hardest is not the speech itself, or the money, or even the way they looked at me when they realized the college fund was gone. What sticks with me is how quietly I walked away. I did not scream, and I did not throw anything, and I did not beg. I just stopped showing up where I was not wanted. People who get comfortable taking you for granted never expect you to pull back. The minute you do, they finally start to feel the real cost of all those little cuts. Lisa, the twins, and even Chris all expected me to keep being the quiet man in the background, ready to pay and fix and soften every blow. They thought they could rewrite the story publicly and still keep the benefits privately. In the end, the world does not usually hand out neat punishments, but every once in a while things line up just right. The twins lost the easy path they assumed was theirs by default. Lisa lost the image she tried so hard to manage. Chris ended up standing in hallways and offices he was not prepared to stand in, facing bills he had never planned to handle. None of that came from revenge in the pure sense. It came from me finally putting my effort where it was seen and appreciated, not where it was used and mocked. Some people might say I was too harsh, that the kids were just young and careless, that Lisa was caught up in appearances, that Chris was just weak and selfish rather than cruel. Maybe there is some truth in all of that. But here is what also is true. For 15 years, I showed up. I did the school runs, paid the bills, sat by hospital beds, and fixed science projects at midnight. I carried the weight of a family that did not carry my name. When they chose to erase that, out loud and in front of everyone, they made a decision, and decisions have consequences even when you did not mean them to. Karma, in my experience, is not magic. It's just the moment when people finally get handed the bill for everything they took for granted. For Lisa and the twins, that moment happened in a college hallway, at a backyard barbecue, and in a quiet driveway with a for sale sign leaning in the wind. For Chris, it was in every phone call and meeting where he realized that being real dad meant more than smiling for a camera. For Sarah, though, karma looked a lot different. For her, it showed up as a door opening that she never expected. And for me, it looked like finally putting my time and money into someone who respected both. If you want to talk about justice, that is where I see it. Not in the tears or the anger or the phone calls left unanswered, but in the way the balance shifted. The people who had treated my effort like air suddenly had to face what life looked like without it. The young woman who had never asked for a thing got a chance to step forward. It did not fix every scar or clean up every mess, but it did something simple and powerful. It lined up what people received with what they had actually put out into the world. That is what karma really feels like most of the time. It is not dramatic lightning from the sky. It is the slow, steady moment when the world stops bending around someone's selfishness. Once that happens, folks have to stand on their own feet for the first time. Watching Lisa fall apart in parking lots and hallways was not something that made me happy, but it also was not enough to drag me back into the role she wanted me to play. She was finally meeting the version of life I had carried by myself for years. Here is what I, as a husband and a stepfather, learned from all of this. Love without boundaries is not noble, it is dangerous. If you keep giving and never demand respect, sooner or later people start believing your effort is just part of the background, like the paint on the walls. They stop seeing you. If you are in a situation like that, whether with a spouse, kids, or anyone else, pay attention to how they talk about you when they think it does not matter. Listen to the jokes, the little digs, the speeches. That is where the truth hides. If someone shows you that they only value what you do and not who you are, take them seriously. Said lines, walk away if you have to. Do not wait for them to change before you decide what you are worth. In my case, justice looked like cutting off the financial lifeline they thought would never end and sending it towards someone who appreciated it. The twins learned that calling a man just the guy who pays the bills can mean losing those bills being paid. Lisa learned that you cannot clap along while your husband is disrespected in public and still expect him to stand behind you in private. And I learned that sometimes the quietest payback is also the most powerful, simply choosing to stop showing up for people who have already decided you do not matter. If there is any advice I would give to someone listening, it is this: do not confuse being kind with letting yourself be used. Respect yourself enough to walk away when your effort is treated like nothing. Justice does not always come with fanfare, but if you stand your ground and put your energy where it is valued, sooner or later, karma will catch up to the ones who thought they could walk all over you forever.